All right. Welcome to the Call of the Heart. This is your host, Xander Sage, here on the Xander Sage podcast. And tonight we have a beautiful teaching for you on freedom. If you think that you're free, just check who's pulling the strings the next time you're scrolling on your phone or going for a snack that you know you shouldn't be eating, or you have your next triggered reaction. Because one of the core teachings that Jesus has is that the truth is what sets us free. That following Jesus is what sets us free. And then to live in another way is a way of sin. And anybody who is living in sin is a slave to sin, as Jesus teaches in the book of John. So today we're going to do just that. We're going to lean on the book of John and reference Jesus' teachings there in chapter 8 of the book of John to get an idea of exactly what most of us are missing when we think of freedom and when we think of slavery. Because if I were to ask you if you're enslaved right now, you would probably look at yourself and say, no, I have a choice. I'm able to work for money. I'm able to choose what I do for work. I'm able to choose where I live. I'm able to show up the way I want to show up in the world. And at a high level, that's true. We do have this choice. But if we look at the underlying motivations of our behavior, if we look at the underlying patterns that motivate our behavior and subtly direct our behavior, we can notice that they're so deeply ingrained that they actually present this sense of slavery within us. So the first step that we really need to do is start to get honest with ourselves and recognize that indeed we are enslaved. There's an unconscious slavery that's happening. And luckily, we had the teachings of Jesus to even point us to this truth. Because without an awareness, without making the unconscious conscious, it's impossible to ever change it. So tonight, one of the first things I want to invite you to do is to start to think about where this unconscious slavery might be showing up in your life. Where some of your behavior might be purely reactionary. Where you might be acting out of pattern, out of a conditioned response from family members or from society or from what seemed right at one time and was what was right at one time, but now you continue to do it just because it's what you do. And believe it or not, this is actually a form of slavery, this conditioned reactionary behavior, because we're no longer operating from presence. We're no longer operating from the felt sense of I am. Now you may ask, like, why is this felt sense of I am so key? How do we know that that's important in removing us from slavery? And this goes back to, one of Jesus's core teachings, and that is his identification with the I am. If we go to John chapter 8, towards the end, and we'll be referencing John 8 here throughout, but towards the end of the section here, Jesus is discussing with, the Pharisees about some of his core teachings and making a strong delineation, he's distinguishing quite strongly between himself and the Pharisees. And he's saying how the Pharisees, they actually come from Satan. They come from the devil. Their father is the devil because they do the devil's ways. Whereas Jesus is saying he's from God because he acts in line with God. So what does Jesus say or what does Jesus mean when he says that he's acting in line with God? And to understand this, we first have to understand what he points to next, which is exactly what God points to in the book of Exodus when God is identifying himself. So stay with me here. This is the foundational teaching of the Bible. John 8, verse 58. Very truly I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. So this is when the Pharisees are saying, you're not even 50 years old. How can you say you've seen Abraham? And he responds saying, very truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. So Jesus identifies as the I am. He doesn't identify as Jesus the man. He doesn't identify as the body of Jesus. He doesn't identify as his teachings as the Word. He identifies as the I am. And in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, God identifies as the I am. So we have a through line here. We have God identifying as the I am, we have Jesus identifying as the I am. And if you come to the I am, if we look to the yogic traditions as how the I am is further described, the I am is this felt sense of presence with existence, with your own very existence, your sense of being here and now that is available for you in this very moment. So zooming in on this I am and seeing how that this takes us out of slavery, right? Because if we're acting from anything other than this I am, this felt sense of presence, and we go back to that unconscious slavery that I was talking about in the beginning. Here we're operating from the mind. We have an idea, we go do the idea. We think it's a good idea, so we follow it, right? But it can become so conditioned that we fall out of the sense of presence with the I am, and we almost like distance ourselves from our felt sense of being, and we come up into the mind, and we're just go on autopilot, doing one thing after the other, without ever really being here in this moment. And the funny thing is, once you start to develop a deeper presence with the I am, you'll start to realize that the action that you would take from that presence is oftentimes quite different from the conditioned action that you've been taking all along. That's because when you truly come into presence with the I am, you attune to all of the multiplicative factors of the situation, all of the dynamics that are at play on this day and this moment of time, with these existing relationships, with these work challenges, with the weather, with all of the factors that could possibly be there and present. Your subconscious mind, your energetic field, it adapts to all of that. It takes all of that in, and when you're truly attuned to the here and now, that all happens in a moment. And then you know what the correct action is from there. It might not always seem logical, it may be different than what you would have chosen in a very similar moment in time a week ago, but some of those factors were different, so the choice at that time was different. Yet if we don't allow ourselves to drop into this presence, if we don't allow ourselves to be in touch with our very existence, with the sense of I am, then we're going to miss some of those factors. And we're going to act from a compulsion, from a pattern, from a repeated behavior that was right at one time. And we become enslaved to a previous version of ourselves. Here back in John chapter 8, verse 34, Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever." So sin here, again, being to miss. Always coming back to this true definition of sin. And that's to miss being in the presence of God, to miss being in connection with the I am, as God identifies. Anytime we fall out of that presence, out of that connection, we have sinned, we have missed. It's not something to guilt ourselves for, to shame ourselves for, but it's just to recognize that we're coming from the wrong place. Not because our intention is wrong, but because energetically at the level of presence we are we're missing it, we're not connected. So we come back to connection, we come back to presence, and then we come out of sin. But Jesus notes here that anyone who sins is a slave to sin. Because as soon as we come out of presence, we're no longer connected to our authentic selves. Our authenticity, our heart, our sense of isness, our sense of being, is where our true self originates from, where our greatest passions emerge from, where our true sense of joy emerges from, and where that innate knowing, that sense of, yes, this is right for me, I should do this, where that arises from. So if we're not connected to that place, then we are a slave to missing. We are a slave to being out of connection, whatever arises for us there. So for some of us, it could be overworking, getting completely wrapped up in the work and trying to get the next thing done. For some of us, it could be chasing a big dream. For some of us, it could be worrying about our kids or loved ones. For some of us, it could be eating and getting caught in patterns of addiction. But the point is, we're coming out of presence. We've lost touch with the I Am. We've lost touch with God. And that is a sin. And we are then enslaved to that sin because we take action from that place, which repeats the cycle and makes the grooves in the sand that much deeper. It makes it that much easier to fall back into that pattern of sin, and that much more difficult to trust presence, to trust the I Am, and to trust that saying no to the idea of the mind, the compulsion and the urge, and the repetitive pattern, that saying no to that is okay, is safe, and is going to bring you what you want in the long run. Because this is really one of the hardest things to do, is to allow ourselves, to trust God. And that means to let go of our great, grand ideas, to drop into presence with the I Am, and to act from that place. So this is a challenging task. It's a life, it's the greatest work of our lives, in fact. It's not something to learn from one video and to then have mastered. It's not something to study and read one book about and have mastered. It's not even one silent retreat and then have mastered. This is a lifetime of work. This is a spiritual path in and of itself, and it's probably the highest spiritual path, the main teaching of God in the first books of the Bible, in the main teaching of Jesus in the Gospels. And what does Jesus say? He says, follow me. This is what he says to his disciples. So if we are to model Jesus, if we are to live by Jesus in the way that he lived, it's to model his core teaching and follow him in the way he is, in the way of his being. So we come into resonance with the I Am. And in order to do that, we need some awareness of when we're not in touch with the I Am. And this is really the key, because as we build up an awareness of when we've fallen into sin, when we've fallen into a disconnection with presence, the more times we can become aware and say, I'm actually not present right now. Let me come back. Let me take a breath. Let me notice the energy flowing throughout my hands, throughout my body, throughout my feet. Let me feel the wind. Let me feel the pulsing of energy through the earth. Let me feel my sense of existence, the I Am. The more we can come back to that, the more and more that becomes a natural movement within our being. And the more trust we build with that sense of existence, the more trust we build with acting from that sense of existence, and the more willing we are to let go of those old ways of slavery, those old ways of conditioning that would have us running around like chickens with our heads cut off, chasing some magic cookie that in fact never gives us the reward that we're looking for. So if you think you're free, the first thing to do is to check and see who's pulling the strings on your next gut reaction. Then come back into sense with the I Am. And keep yourself being aware anytime you fall out of that presence. Because freedom isn't something that you find later. It's something that you can return to right now. It's something that is here and now in this moment. But it's only available to you in your own heart, in the presence with your very existence, in the presence of God, in the presence of Christ. So thank you so much for joining tonight. As always, we have episodes every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. The teachings of Jesus and the Gospels, the Bible, to the teachings of yoga and meditation, and showing how all of these paths really point us to the same foundational truth, that you are connected to the I Am, that you are here and now, and you are connected to God inherently through your very existence. So I hope that you're able to condition this feeling, that you're able to choose your authentic self this week, and to continuously move towards that sense of freedom, that sense of presence, and that sense of love, which is your true nature. Thank you so much for joining tonight. Sending you. May you have a wonderful evening. Amen.